In the golden age of American art, several artists helped define the era, and many Americans, after a brief study in their own country, chose to work in Europe, particularly in Paris, at the École des Beaux-Arts, or Julien's Academy. In this presentation, we look at one artist that made an indelible impact. It is Kenyon Cox. He was born in the fertile Midwest, in Warren, Ohio, in 1856. He sought art as a career choice and began his early art training at Cincinnati's Art Academy of Cincinnati, formerly known as the McMicken School of Art. Thereafter, he sought further schooling at the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts. However, by 1877, he decided to venture to Paris and begin a 5-year course at the atelier of Jean Leon Gerome. We want to focus on 3 areas of Kenyon's development as a painter: the Paris years and Gerome, his return to America and transition as a teacher with the Art Students League of New York, and finally his legacy as a writer, art critic, and muralist. In Paris, Kenyon Cox would absolutely blossom as a student. His work, and in particular his natural drawing skills, were noticed immediately. It was a time of tremendous growth in the ateliers, and the art establishments were hard-pressed to keep up with the ever-changing styles and new work. At each year's salon, artists would vie for favoured spots on walls in the hopes of discovery, which might lead to commissions and honours, hopefully. Critics play an important part, whereby an artist may receive favourable reviews to kick-start attention in newspapers or catalogues. The Paris studios were roughly divided into 2 categories for pictures. Curiously enough, at Carolus Duran's atelier, students rarely made drawings. Unlike his contemporaries, the student began work ordinarily on the canvas itself and painted such preliminary studies as were necessary with the brush. In short, while his taste was old-fashioned, Duran's procedures were quite modern. He thought only in terms of paint. In contrast, one may recall the fine pencil studies that would underlie any significant painting of Kenyon's master, Gerome. In Paris, the style of the Institute had already been subdivided into a more linear and a more painter-like tradition. In the old Empire style was Gerome. He thought of everything in line, with colour as a secondary grace. His ideals, naturally, passed to America in Kenyon Cox, George de Forest Brush, and Robert Vonneau. While a student in France, Cox was freely able to travel, and he spent some time in Grèze-sur-Loing, doing plein-air painting and discovery in general of the many new ways of painting and recording nature, and he had a lot to say about his discoveries. He writes, "Except for the work of a few great masters who stand apart from the general stream of tendency, what the art of the 19th century accomplished was mainly a broadening of the subject matter of painting, and a new and detailed investigation of the appearance of nature. The 19th century painted many subjects that had not been painted before, and it made discoveries of certain aspects of nature which had not been previously observed, or, if observed, had not been recorded in art. It studied landscape for itself, and painted it as it had never been painted. It placed the human figure in the open air and tried to register the exact effect upon it of the sun and the sky. Its activities were so essentially naturalistic that even the schoolmen admitted more and more the direct imitation of nature, and one of the later phases of 19th century realism was that attempt at a scientific analysis of light, and that sacrifice of everything else to the rendering of light which we know as Impressionism. In this second part, we find Kenyon is about to return to America and has longing visions of what he hopes to accomplish. He sends letters regularly with photos of his pictures to his mother and father for approval for time spent. He will also begin to teach once he returns and joins an impressive list of painters already teaching at the Art Students League in New York. This would be perhaps the start of a real golden age for the arts in America. And Cox had not been in New York a year when he sought decorative work, he states, which is the work above everything else I should like. In one story we find of interest, he sent home a picture which he painted that fascinated Cox, and he worked at it steadily in the midst of regular obligations. By late May he had the female figure photographed and sent a proof home, which does not do it complete justice, he writes. His mother disapproved of the nude figure, and the photo provoked a long-range quarrel with his father, who thought he was wasting time on projects that would not sell. He should tend to illustrations and above all paint landscapes. Cox answered hotly in the best family tradition, resentful of parental criticism and irritated that such educated and thoughtful people still did not understand his motives. He had not foregone any illustration work, and insisted that "I have no ability whatever to paint a landscape except directly from nature," which was hardly possible in New York City. Besides, landscapes gained him neither income nor stature. The people whose opinions he valued saw him as a figure painter and said in effect, "That's all well enough, but why should an artist with your training and knowledge of the figure waste his time on landscapes? We expect figure pictures from you." Even if Vision of Moonrise failed, he would learn a great deal from such a large and complex project. "I believe that one can do best what one loves best, and even if I never make a success, I prefer a struggle for what seems to me the best, rather than an easy attainment of something lower." He intended to illustrate and teach and do informal works that might sell, but his heart was in classical allegory that expressed his ideals. I must be allowed, I think, to keep some such piece of work on hand as this picture, in which, apart from all considerations of money or success, I will strive for what I love most in art. In our final segment, we discover the thoughtful Kenyon Cox expanding on his ideals as time went on, and he married, with his son also wishing to pursue art. By the late 1890s, Cox employed some nude or partially nude figures in allegorical paintings and murals. He also developed a way of writing as a critic that allowed the wise to know when he was describing nudes without saying so. He did not abandon his commitment to the nude, but with time there remains the accepted limitations of popular taste. In 1918 he warned his son Alyn, studying at the American Academy in Rome, to cover the male genitals to avoid criticism. "As art, you are right, but you are likely to get into trouble with the prudish, and I know by experience how difficult it is to get it out of people's heads that you are indecent if you once get it in." Kenyon Cox would go on as a prolific writer and critic, authoring several books, and did a wonderful job of putting down precepts the art-minded would relate to quite well. In his early days, enamoured of the work of Fortuny and the reigning modernism, he retained a strong interest in Renaissance precedents. He states, "I believe I have always had a classical natural feeling in art, and that my natural bent is towards such pictures as the Venus and the Centaur that I will paint some day," he wrote in his diary in 1876. He proposed an allegorical painting of night and day. His passion, of course, was always the figure and his skill at drawing, a love, he continued, to the absolute joy of art students of the school at the League, that eagerly pored over each sketch. One critic records, "This fear of the nude was also part of the stale view that art life was depraved, and that artists and models were prey to sexual temptation." Once again, Cox found this view astonishing and read his mother a stern lecture. "It seems as if no one would ever understand that an artist's models are tools." Cox stubbornly went his way on this question. His friend William Coffin wrote an important biographical article about him in 1891, and noted that "no painter among us has a purer sense of beauty in the ideal, and no one has a keener perception of grace in form and distinction of colour in nature. He is impelled to paint the nude simply because he considers it beautiful." Cox spent a good deal of energy attempting to educate the art public to accept idealized nudes. He and Will Lowe wrote a carefully reasoned explanation of the appeals of figure work in 1892. They noted the usual challenges in depicting form and function, but in the end, great figure work was conceptual. Ideas, if they are to be expressed in graphic or plastic art, must be incarnated, and the human figure is the one great medium of expression for abstract ideas in the arts. That the figure should be nude, if it is to express great and simple ideas, seems also natural. And Cox freely adopted the advice he gave students, saying in 1910, "I enjoy drawing from the nude for its own sake, and find it a continuing and valuable discipline, so one can see that the tools of the trade sometimes must remain in the trade, and not seen perhaps." Yet Cox was the ever-ready writer on these matters, and his thoughts on the general ideals and practice and history of what real painting is and should be is truly insightful and well worth reading his books. He was well revered, and many of his finest works have yet to emerge. Cox followed the precepts of his teaching and study, and his own inclinations to let it personify high ideals of personal purity and civic virtue. Like most spokesmen of his class and circumstance, he saw women as guiding forces of civilization, personifications of ideals that tempered materialism and disorder in masculine life. His era prized realism and the mundane, yet had a parallel need for exalted expression and for the pursuit of ideals, which female forms symbolized in the arts. Cox was in good company. Idealized women figured in the works of leading artists, such as Augustus St. Gaudens, Thomas W. Dewing, Abbott H. Thayer, and many muralists. Once again, in the largest sense, idealization of women in this way reflected a desire to establish unifying purposes and tastes in a period of rapid and bewildering change. And finally, we hope you enjoyed this look at a draftsman who was an idealist all the way and sought the beautiful and referenced the truth to nature and art. Thank you to our subscribers, and please remember to leave a like as it helps the channel. So till next time, it's bye for now.